Hey everyone, so with Marvel's One World Under Doom event now underway, I recently sat down with the series writer Ryan North for a deep dive into this exciting 9-issue saga. We discussed everything from the book's origin, Ryan's inspirations, and the differences between writing a self-contained comic like the Fantastic Four to a large-scale company-wide event. This was such a fascinating conversation and I wanted to share it with you all. Unfortunately, I had a couple of technical issues on my end during the recording, so my camera does freeze a fair amount throughout the interview. Nevertheless, I think this is a great conversation that offers a lot of insight into both One World Under Doom and Ryan's continued work on Marvel's First Family. I hope you enjoy it. Hello everyone, welcome back to Owen Likes Comics. Today I am joined by one of my favourite writers in all of comics and one of my favourite people in comics to talk to. I'm joined today by the wonderful Ryan North. Ryan, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
You've really taken to heart the staring at the camera thing. I'm ever so slightly intimidated.
Very intently staring at the camera. Well, I mean, I'll do a lot of Zoom meetings now, and I had to turn off the feature that shows your own face because I found that I would just stare at it the whole meeting. I'm like, I don't think I'm a narcissist, but this can't be healthy.
I get that so much. So I was working as a teacher up until quite recently, and I was teaching during lockdown in kind of 2020, 2021. And it was rough. But I remember being moments where I'd be teaching kind of Zoom meetings, and there would be that thing like, I've never thought of myself as a narcissist or someone that looks in the mirror a lot, but when the corner box is there, you kind of, your eyes gravitate towards it.
Yep.
But yes, we're not here to talk about ourselves. We're here to talk about Dr. Doom.
Oh yeah, him too.
We'll park the question about whether or not Doom's a self-insert character then, given you did write a book called How to Take Over the World.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry, go ahead.
And I was going to say, and I did wear green specifically for this occasion, so.
Should have thought of that.
So yeah, so let's talk about One World Under Doom. I suppose that's what we're here to talk about. This is the kind of big Marvel event for 2025. I was there at New York when you and Tom Brevoort and everyone kind of formally unveiled it. And it's been a story that I've been following quite intensely ever since, as you know, because we've spoken before, and as anyone watching this knows, I've been a huge fan of what you've been doing on Fantastic Four. It's my favorite book in all of comics right now, which is becoming, each month is becoming more and more of an achievement because more and more amazing books are coming out each month. It's such an incredible time to be reading comics. I had Scott Snyder on the show quite recently, and we were both talking about the stuff that DC have been doing with the Absolute line, and just every publisher right now is at their A game, and yet every month seem to be finding new ways to top the charts. So congrats to you.
Thank you.
So yeah, so One World Under Doom, this starts on February 18th, I believe. I don't have that written down. That is just off the noggin.
That's great.
It's yourselves, it's RB Silver, and this is going to be a kind of 9-part event series that you're working on, and then also we'll kind of have wide ramifications into the Marvel Universe as a whole. So before we dive into the specifics of certain things about the series, I was really interested to ask about where the origins of this story came to be. Obviously, you've been writing Fantastic Four for a little while now, and issue 28 is coming out this week at the time of recording. But from all accounts, from everything I've read of you talking about the series, there seems to be a story and an idea that you've had for quite a few years. So I was quite intrigued to hear where the origins of this came from.
Yeah, it had been brewing for a while. And just before I answer, I checked. It's actually February 12th. It comes out, not the 18th. So we're close.
I'm a fraud.
I thought it sounded good to me, and then I checked the calendar. It's not. But yeah, this goes back years. It begins with the Blood Hunt event, and that was going to end with Doom taking over as Sorcerer Supreme. And Tom Brevoort, our editor on both those, had this idea of like, well, what if we had, the real idea of laying the seed of the next story in the current story, which I think is great. It makes it feel like it's a real universe. Things are lived in. Things are just happening for no reason. And the earliest email I got was a couple of years ago saying, hey, we're thinking of doing this. And if we do, what would you do with that, hypothetically speaking? And I didn't necessarily realize I was being asked to pitch an event. I just read what would you do if Doctor Doom had this power and it's take over the world? Like this is the story we're telling. And so I did the thing I learned you're not supposed to do if you're a team, which is double text, where I sent over an email and then a second email with more thoughts.
I was going to, just to interject slightly, I was going to say this is exactly how you got the gig writing Fantastic Four, is that you kind of like gave a pitch without realizing you were giving a pitch.
Yeah. I'm not a smart man. I don't notice things that are happening. So yeah, I sent over this sort of high-level outline of how things could happen, what sort of stuff would be happening. And in that first email was a speech that Doom would give. I found the easiest way to get in the story was to capture Doom's voice and what would Doom say after taking over the world. So I opened with that speech, and something very similar to that speech is what the issue 1 opens with. So it's been there for years, the central thesis statement of Doom saying, hey, I've taken over. Things are going to be good now, forever.
I feel like that kind of speech is something that Doom's had in his back pocket since he was a child.
Oh yeah, he's been writing and rewriting it in his head. And
there's a moment in
better than what I just said.
Yeah. There's a moment in Secret Wars by Jonathan Hickman and Asad Ribic that always sticks in my mind, which is when kind of Reed and everyone on the Life Raft arrives on Battle World and they find Strange, and Reed is saying to Strange, how could you let Doom, take the powers of the Beyonder and remake the universe and rule the world? Like, how irresponsible. And Strange says, think about it this way. Dr. Doom has been planning on how he would rule the world pretty much his entire adult life. He has thought about it daily. He's quite good at it. And I think that is, it's a big part of what Hickman did in that story. And that thought process seems to apply quite well to your version of Doom here as well.
Yeah,
thinking that he's kind of...
Same guy.
So we've talked a little bit about how kind of the opportunity and the idea of One World Under Doom came to be. So when the idea was kind of first floated to you and you were fleshing out, okay, here's how I think the story would shape out, here's what Doom's reaction would be, what was your initial thought process in kind of plotting out the kind of overall beats of this story?
That's a good question. I think the first thing was to sort of take off the limits that you naturally give yourself when writing in a shared universe. When I'm writing a Fantastic Four story or even a Squirrel Girl story, I know that, for example, I can't blow up the moon because that will affect what's happening in everyone else's book. And if I do that, that's going to be a big headache for everyone else. And we need to have a good reason for that to make the juice worth the squeeze. And after doing this for a couple of years, you kind of learn instinctively what those limits are. And when I was first plotting out this, big Doom story, I kept having to remind myself that you can go big. This is the big story. You can go as huge as you want. And if you want to blow up the moon, if you need to blow up the moon, then let's blow up the moon. Don't hold back from that. So once you sort of take those restrictions away, you realize you're not playing in a sandbox, you're playing in the entire desert, to continue that weird metaphor. It's a lot of fun.
Something I was thinking about a lot is obviously, you were 28 issues into Fantastic Four. In terms of what's out, I'm sure that you've written many, many more issues. And that book's been a very kind of self-contained and insular series. Characters have kind of popped in and out, but for the most part, it's been quite a self-contained series. It must be very different to go from a book like that to something like One World Under Doom, which not only is this huge event book that has everyone in it, but also an event that is spinning out and affecting all of these other ongoing titles as well.
Yeah, it is. It's funny. Normally, when you're writing a book in a shared universe, Marvel, DC, whatever, and one of these big events happens, your reaction can be like, oh man, now I'm going to have to incorporate this and sort of get this to work. And it was honestly very funny to be doing that for my own event and being like, oh yes, I'm the guy who made this complicated for myself. But I always, that's always your first thought is like, oh man, here we go. But the next thought is always like, oh, here's a new status quo I get to play in. Like for Blood Hunt, the fun part of that was figuring out, well, how do you tell a story with vampires under the restriction that the Fantastic Four are not going to be the ones to solve this because it's not their event. And what came out of that was I started really proud of, with Reed and Alicia trapped at an art gallery trying just to save people, trying to do what they can in this difficult situation. So I realize it's a chance to play in a status quo you wouldn't normally get to play in. And I couldn't tell that story normally because if I tried to trap Reed and Alicia somewhere, you'd be like, oh, what are the other heroes doing? Clearly they would save them, even if the Fantastic Four can't. This gives you the chance not to do that. So you have to sort of remind yourself, yes, this is a big status quo change, but this is also a chance to tell stories you couldn't otherwise tell.
Yeah, and something I was really interested in asking you is kind of in terms of the different approaches to writing. You know, it's very different to write a kind of tie-in issue to an event to writing a big event. How has the process changed for you in terms of, like, both in regards to how you plot out stories and then just how you handle the weight and the kind of length of indifference?
It's very different, and also one is kind of a break from the other. When you're telling a 9-month story, you've got, I don't know how many pages, 9 times 20 plus 5, whatever that equals out to. You got all this space, and so you get to focus on all these different aspects of the story. Well, with Fantastic Four, I've got 1, sometimes 2 issues to set up the premise, explore it, have a twist, have some family stuff, some relationships develop. All this stuff has to be very tightly orchestrated. And what I found when writing Doom, because the whole event's already written, it's done. It was less of, oh, great, now I can stretch out and relax, and more I realized that, these are still very dense, complicated issues. I'm just getting to pack in a lot more across these 9 months of it. So it should be a pretty rewarding event, a rewarding story at the end, because it's just as dense as Fantastic Four is in terms of big ideas and big swings and big twists. But it gets to last so much longer than anything I've done in FF.
That's so fascinating and so insightful. So when I was at New York Comic Con, I met and had a good conversation with Spencer Ackerman, who obviously has just taken over on Iron Man and is doing a really, really terrific run on that series. And we were talking a little bit about One World Under Doom, because obviously it had just been kind of unveiled that weekend. And he spoke with such excitement and joy about being involved in the event and how the stuff he's got planned for Iron Man is going to tie in with Doom and the Fantastic Four. And you spoke so highly of yourself and everything that you've got in mind for this story. What's the kind of collaborative process been like, working with kind of the other writers at Marvel who feed into the story?
I'm very excited for what Spencer's got. He's told me his story, and he's got stuff coming up that I was like, this is exactly what I wanted to have happen with tie-ins. Like, it's foundational to the event. It's really cool, really interesting, very exciting. And the event I've tried to give all the other writers is, like I said, the event's fully written. And so instead of me saying, okay, well, by month 6, I think this is where we'll be, I can say, here's the script. Here's 9 scripts for the whole event. So you know exactly what's happening when. And I don't have to be in that position where I tell you something's fine, then I go, oh, wait, I changed my mind, and now this thing won't work anymore. So ideally, hopefully, everything will click together really nicely, because the reality of telling a story is that everyone wants to do their best work, but with the fact we're telling a big story across 9 months, that can be more difficult to orchestrate. And by having it fully completed, it should really click together nicely.
And then obviously you've worked with a lot of great artists on Fantastic Four and Squirrel Girl. Pretty much in all your work, I've always been impressed by the consistent quality of art. And obviously on One World Under Doom, working with R.B. Silver, who I think is one of the absolute best artists in comics today. What's the process been like of collaborating with him?
He is this talent that is always surprising. You think, you're like, okay, I know this guy is great, so I know what he's going to do here. And then he comes back something that you're like, I would have never thought of that. That's so much better than what I was imagining. Even with my heightened expectations, you're still giving me these new things that knock me over. It's one of the greatest things of working in comics is that you get to collaborate with these artists that are at the absolute peak of their game. And I always feel like I'm getting away with something. Like it's a cheat being a comics writer, because we all got into comics because we love it. We love these visual stories. And my part of it is not especially visual. It's just text describing a story. And getting back pages from RB Silva or any artist, it just was like, how am I getting paid for this? Like, this is so incredible what they've done. And yet somehow my name is also there on the cover. So I'm always aware of it. I'm always really, I don't know, respectful of it, I think. I know that I have the easy job in comics. It takes, 10 seconds to say on this page, Mr. Fantastic fights 100 Doombots, and it takes all day to draw that. I can't think of another job I'd have where I get to work with people like RB Silva on a story for 9 months. Like, that's just insane.
So obviously with RB Silva, we kind of touched on Hickman a little bit a couple of times here. And I think something I found really interesting about One World Under Doom is that it's kind of coincidentally the 10-year anniversary of Secret Wars, which is the last time Doctor Doom conquered a large-scale world or universe.
Reality.
Yeah, all of that was kind of like the ultimate Doom conquest. And I was rereading it recently in the kind of mind of knowing kind of a little bit about your approach to Doom and what I've heard and can expect from One World Under Doom. Going back and flicking through that series was so insightful, because I've always thought that Hickman had such a great read on Victor as a character, and I've always really appreciated your take on Victor as well. So with something like that, with kind of being cognizant of how other writers have told, not this story, but similar stories of Doom winning in a sense previously, have you in any way took any inspiration from any of those previous tales, be they Hickman or other, or has this been very much a kind of singular independent vision of yours?
No, I mean, it obviously builds on what's come before. I think, like Hickman, the best Doctor Doom stories are ones in which he wins. Even when he loses, I think what makes Doom so special amongst the villains of the Fantastic Four, and really the villains of the Marvel Universe, is that even when he loses, he extracts something as a win. You don't punch him until he stops doing crimes and he goes off to jail. He still takes something from you. And those things he takes are things that you maybe did not want to give. So it takes a lot longer to write a Doom story. For the Fantastic Four number 7 or number 700, depending how you're counting, it's a Doom story, oversized one. And that story took 2 months to write instead of the normal one, because the first month just figuring out, well, how does Doom do this? How do we tell a story where Doom can win without blowing up the premise of the book? And the funny thing about One World Over Doom is we do get to see him win. We get to see him win immediately and follow through in the consequences of that for 9 months.
Something I was interested in asking you then. So obviously kind of the book is less about how Doom wins and more about the kind of the impact and the ramifications of Doom winning. Did you always think that was a more interesting kind of approach to telling the story, as opposed to this is kind of how Doom beats X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, there's a bit of both. I think when you're telling a story of Doctor Doom taking over the world, you've got a story that is necessarily on this higher global plane of, countries and politics, international politics, and all this stuff that can feel a little removed from the normal Marvel universe. So it's very grounded in the geopolitics, but also, the cool fight. Doctor Doom is fighting off attacks, challenges to his rule. He's running the world, and there are going to be people like, I don't know, pull a name out of the hat, Hydra, that doesn't like someone like Doom being in charge of them and is going to attack that. So it's, I don't know, it's interesting, it's fun, it's a chance to tell stories we don't always get to see with Doom, to sort of widen the lens of it, to incorporate the entire world.
I think that idea of widening the scope a little bit is something that I've been really fascinated by, in that, like we said, Fantastic Four has been a very, not insular, but largely self-contained series. Obviously, Squirrel Girl involved quite a few characters from the wider Marvel universe. But this is a series that is going to include everyone. Anyone from any corner of the universe can get pulled into Doom's wrath. Were there any characters
Yes.
that are involved in One World Under Doom that you were specifically excited to tackle that you'd never written before?
Yeah, there is one. I had written her before, but I guess it's a slight spoiler for issue 2. But the setup of that issue is Doctor Doom talking to his goddaughter Valeria and saying, "Hey, I want you to understand why I did this. I want to justify this to you so that you'll support me." And that relationship between Doom and Valeria is not something I've gotten to touch on yet in my run, because when he showed up, Valeria was trapped in time and blah blah blah. But it's such a great relationship. It is something that I believe should not work on paper, where you're like, hey, we got these characters, and their greatest villain is also the godfather to their daughter. Like, well, how would that happen? Why would that happen? And why would anyone respect that? But it works because, for all of his myriad faults, Doom believes himself to be a man of honor, and so he has Valeria in a special place amongst everyone else on Earth. And that relationship between this powerful man and this daughter of his most hated enemy is so rich and so fun. It's my favorite, I think, in comics. And so getting to really dig into that for that issue was something that was just super fun. And I was really looking forward to it.
Yeah. I'd recently, just after Christmas, I'd lent a friend who's just starting to get into comics more often. I'd let them borrow my copy of kind of the omnibus of Mark Waid's Fantastic Four from the early 2000s. And obviously that has a lot of those kind of great Doom Valeria moments in it. And when they'd read it and gave it back to me quite recently, we just were gushing about some of the incredible moments that they put in that run, where Valeria says her first word and it's Doom, and Reed's expression on his face.
Come on. That's great.
I love it so much. And then obviously what you did in issue 700 as well, even though Valeria isn't present, that is at its crux a Victor and Valeria story. And I think it's one of the absolute best, even though Valeria isn't kind of physically present.
Yeah, you will. That continues in the story. Yeah, she is rather one of the few people whose opinion he cares about beyond his own.
Definitely. I kind of love that idea of like, this is this, incredible scientist, this master sorcerer, he's the sorcerer supreme. He's one of the most powerful, he's the ruler of a sovereign nation. He's one of the most strongest and most powerful people in the world. But it's like one of the only people that can truly get to him and break his heart is this small young girl. But then also, like, if he can have Valeria's support, not only what that would mean to him personally, but what it means in terms of like getting one over on Reed is just that kind of triangle of those characterizations is so wonderful to me. And it's so rich with kind of nuance and subtext and stuff you can play with it.
Yeah. Probably shouldn't say anything else about it. I don't want to spoil what's coming up, but yeah, it is a very rich relationship.
Yeah. I can imagine, just as a writer, if I was tasked with playing with those three characters and kind of diving into the dynamics, there's so much to sink your teeth into, and I just have so much fun with it. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I was going to say, so with that, obviously, the Fantastic Four are obviously going to play a big role in One World Under Doom just because of the nature of who they are. But then you're also still writing the Fantastic Four ongoing alongside it.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a little bit about earlier about kind of the joys and also some of the difficulties that come with writing tie-in stories to an event. And like we said, it's a little bit different when you're also the one that's writing the events and the tie-ins. Before we kind of talk about what the Fantastic Four's role in the event might be, how has it been for you writing both series to kind of balance and juxtapose, still telling these one-shot, self-contained, sci-fi stories with the Fantastic Four that can involve all of these other kind of weird, wacky, and wonderful concepts, while still keeping the kind of premise of One World Under Doom ticking, either overtly or subconsciously?
Yeah, it's been real tricky. I made a spreadsheet. I actually made a mural board at one point, because you're not just plotting out these 9 issues of Doom, you're plotting out what's happening during Fantastic Four in this time. And those are 2 separate but interlacing parallel stories. And so a change to one would change things elsewhere. And I want to keep, I have a shape of the story for Doom, and I want the FF story to reflect that in different ways. And one change here would snowball somewhere else. So it's there is some complexity to it, a bit of a dance, but it's also at its best, it's sort of scratching that itch that you want from a shared universe, where it feels like everything has consequences, and the things that happen here could show up somewhere over there.
Yeah.
So it's been gratifying. It's been very challenging, keeping it all straight in my head, but it will continue with the Doom having this big story and the Fantastic Four having these smaller self-contained stories in this new status quo relating to it back and forth.
Yeah, because that was something I was really curious about, is this idea of it would be, obviously the Fantastic Four are also going to be players in the event book, but then
Yep.
it would be quite easy to just kind of work backwards from that and fill the gaps in their own series. But you don't want to lose what makes the work that you've been doing on Fantastic Four so great, which is the fact that these often kind of one-shot stories that don't require a lot of kind of required reading and are very accessible and easy, and do tell a very concise and clear story on their own.
Yeah, and we keep that in the book because that's it. I want the Fantastic Four to be accessible. I don't want it to be there's no homework assigned. You have to go read. You should read One World Under Doom, but you don't.
I don't know. You did make me read a lot of academic papers on OMG particles.
Yes, but there is one thing. There's a major beat that happens in One World Under Doom that we then show happening again in Fantastic Four the next month, so that if you are only reading that book, you're not going to be lost. You won't be like, how did this happen? Where did Reed get that funny hat? We'll show you him getting the funny hat, so it'll be understood. Because I want to keep Fantastic Four accessible. I don't want it to feel like, to enjoy this comic, you have to do homework. So these are two stories, they're separate stories, they're related stories, they're overlapping stories. But if you're someone who just wants to read Fantastic Four, you can still just read Fantastic Four.
Without talking too much about plot, because I don't want to spoil the book for anyone, and certainly I don't want to spoil it for myself. Coming up with these kind of original stories that the Fantastic Four can go on in their own series, while also dealing with the wider ramifications of Doom and the effect that's having on them psychologically and mentally. What's it been like in terms of how, less about what the Fantastic Four are doing in these 9 issues that run alongside the event, but more kind of their mindset and their thought process and their mentality? Yeah,
you can kind of see hints at how that's going to be handled by looking at what it's been like for the past 6 months between Blood Hunt and this event. All Reed knows is that Doom announced he's going to be Sorcerer Supreme, and then he makes an announcement on TV and then disappears under this dome in Latveria. And if you look at what Fantastic Four has been in those 6 months since then, there's been a lot of different stories. There's been fun ones, there's been romantic ones, there's been spooky ones, but they've all had this thing in the background of Reed being like, what's he building in there? What's going on? The blood vomiting skull in the basement, which is like comedy fun for Halloween, begins with Reed being like, I'm working on this magic detector to figure out what Doom's up to. Johnny Storm's romance in an alien world begins with them going to Latveria to investigate the dome. So it's something where it's like, this is something that Reed has always been pondering. It's something that he's trying to figure out. And you can use that to tell different stories, but they're all starting from this one thing of like, I can't get Doom out of my mind, and I need to know what's happening in there.
I'm here for Reed going kind of a bit crazy, trying to process all of this.
Yeah, I think Doom looks at Reed and sees, the one man that if he didn't exist, if Reed didn't exist, Doom's life would be so much easier. Because there wouldn't be that man who can credibly make a claim to be as good as he is. And for Reed, Doom is someone who I don't think he'll never stop trying to rescue, because he sees all the potential, the same potential he sees in himself, and that brilliance and that ambition and that unwillingness to accept things that you think are unjust, for various definitions what unjust is. And he never stops seeing that hope in Doom, that he could be turned away from the dark into the light. And so you have these two men who see a lot of themselves in the other and want very different things from the other. They want very different changes from the other. And it's a real intense relationship, I think.
So something I was interested in asking about, so obviously I was there a New York Comic Con when yourself and Tom Brevoort and everyone kind of launched the book and fully announced it. And something I was quite curious to ask about, and I've not really found an answer from anything I found online, is it looks like there may have been a slight change in title and format at some point down the road. This could be me slightly misremembering things, but I looked through the
No, you're
photos
right.
I took from that panel in New York, and it was announced as a 5-issue series. So when kind of updated solicitations came out, and I think in October, it was then announced as 9 issues.
Yeah, it's a little misleading. It was always going to be this 9-issue story called One World Under Doom. I think there were plans, there may still be plans, to sort of break it up into 2 halves. The first half being called The Rise of Emperor Doom, and that would be for 5 issues. And I'm not sure if they're still doing that or not, sort of above my pay grade. But it is the same 9-issue story. It was always going to be, just like different ways of viewing it.
Yeah, I kind of assumed as much that it would be a kind of more sense of formatting the story as opposed to being different stories. But I was going back through the photos I took at that panel and everything that was written about that panel at the time, and it did just stick out as a curious thing that I wanted to ask.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're the only one who was like, wait a minute, how long is this? So I'm happy to clarify
it was like a strange Mandela effect. I was like, oh, wait a minute. So yeah, so speaking about New York Comic Con and speaking about when the book was formally unveiled, I remember sitting there and watching you talk about it and watching it kind of be fully shown off to the world. And you seemed so excited and so proud to have this story out there and to let people kind of see the first crumbs of it. And just from being in that room, you could really get a sense of your excitement and your joy and how much this book means to you. I was really interested in just asking kind of like, as you know, this is the biggest event Marvel are doing this year. This is one of the biggest things you've done as a writer in your career. What does it mean to you personally to be taking on a story like this?
That's a great question. It is the kind of thing that I don't think you can ever really expect to do. It's not like there's a normal pathway. If you do this, that, and the other thing, then you can write the next Marvel event. It's sort of, you get lucky, you're in the right place at the right time. I happened to be writing Fantastic Four at this time, so it worked out well. But I also recognize that it's both it's a compliment, but also a responsibility. Like, this is a story that's going to run for most of 2025. So it better be good. There's a lot of people relying on this. There's a lot of all the other writers and artists doing tie-ins. I don't want them to have to tie into a lousy event. You know, I want it to be the best thing I can do. And so the advantage of having it have all this runway up to it is to get to write it and polish it and make sure it fits together and make sure it is the best possible version of this story that I can make. So there's some anticipation, some fear, like I hope people like it. But I'm also very proud of what it is. It's a type of story that you don't get to tell in any other media. Like, you can't tell a story like this in your own personal character universe, because these other characters that show up don't carry any weight. If no one knows who these people are, you don't really care about them. But people care about who Dr. Doom is and who Iron Man is and who anyone I bring the story is. And so it matters in a way that you don't get in any other form of fiction. So in that sense, it's been a real privilege to get to sort of have the keys to the kingdom and tell the biggest possible story I can tell with Dr. Doom and everyone, the entire Marvel universe, bringing that in to make it the best story it can be. So it's something I recognize as unique, something that I recognize is unlikely to ever be repeated. Like, even if this is the best-selling story of all time, that doesn't mean I'm writing the next event. Like, that's just not how it works. That's not how you want it to work. You want it to feel like this is a world of things keep happening to everyone, and it shouldn't just be the little Ryan North Fantastic Four corner of the world. It should be the whole Marvel universe. So it's special, it's unique, it's rare, and it's lucky. It's a lot of luck getting to do something like this. I don't think I'm especially competent at it. I just think I was in the right place at the right time.
I think you're selling yourself quite short there, personally, if I can say so. For me, as someone that's been a fan of yours and has got to speak to you a few times, you know, over the last year, I was really proud for you when I first heard, and I was so excited for you. And I'm still so excited. I can't wait to read the series. I could tell how much kind of the book meant to you and how much you were putting into it. And I really do think it's going to pay off.
Thank you. That's very kind. And I do, yeah, that's, I do hope that it brings, since it is the most high profile thing I've done for Marvel, I do hope that it brings more attention to Fantastic Four and Squirrel Girl and other things I've written, because I think the greatest weakness the Fantastic Four have, and ideally the movie coming out this year, 2025, will help with it, is that there's kind of, because they've been around since the 60s, kind of this idea that they are old, that they are, your parents' superheroes. And I don't think that's true. Like, there's nothing wrong with the characters. They're great. You can tell fantastic stories with them, no pun intended. But if you have the sense of like, oh, well, this is an old comic, I don't need to read this. And then you read this Doom event and you're like, oh, this is really cool. I should check out more about what these Fantastic Four people are up to. I hope that'll bring more attention to that corner of the universe. So I think that's the one thing the Fantastic Four have struggled with for the past while, is this idea that they are old and uninteresting. And there's it couldn't be farther from the truth.
Agreed. I think that's a really interesting thing to pick up, as they're my favorite team book. They've been my favorite team since I started reading comics. But like you said, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, they have had this unshakable stigma almost of being like your dad's superhero team.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was, they went away for a couple of years. They didn't have a book for a little while. There was kind of this period in which the Fantastic Four seemed like a kind of something from a bygone era. Whether or not that was deserved is a different question, but it did seem like for a little while that they were just kind of relegated to the past. And it's been so nice over the last, even just very recently, and kind of my own anecdotal evidence, seeing the kind of resurgence of interest in these characters because of, like I said, because of your run, because of what Dan Slott had done, because of what's going on with the Ultimates, with the Maker, and with Ultimate Doom, what's been going on with the movie, Marvel Rivals, which is a video game I've been told that they are in and people are really excited about. I have relatives much younger than me that are asking me loads of questions about the Fantastic Four because they've been playing as them in this game. It feels like there's starting to be a real turn of momentum and people want to see these characters. And as someone that's kind of been flying the flag for the longest time when no one really cared, it's really exciting for me. And again, without kind of blowing too much smoke up your ass because you're here, the book has been under such a great custodian for the last couple of years.
Thank you.
It's been a run that I have so confidently recommended to people who I want to showcase. Here's why the Fantastic Four are amazing. There's never been a moment where I haven't felt 100% safe that no, this is a great representation of these characters. And so to see that and kind of see those characters be in such safe hands as they do start to regain a bit more kind of mainstream interest, and then to see this Doom event is kind of this big coming out party at a time when, like I said, not only the Fantastic Four are everywhere, but Doctor Doom's going to be everywhere as well because of things like Secret Wars and the movies as well. I think it's such an exciting time, and I think everything Fantastic Four and Doom related is in such safe hands. And I just hope that people do discover why these characters have been around so long, why they are the first family of Marvel, why they were the ones that started this entire wave. And I also hope everyone discovers my Fantastic Four videos.
I mean, there's a reason why we've been talking about these characters for 60 years, and there's so much you can do with them. There's so many places they can go. At the end of the first issue, I'm like, here's what I think with the Fantastic Four. They can do anything. They can literally, and I'm trying to show that in the run where we'll have, a big space issue. We'll have a horror issue. We'll have a noir issue. Well, they fit into all these different slots because they are such wonderfully complex and multifaceted characters. And there's 9 of them on the team already. You've got
so many of them.
There's lots to play with. I've been working through every possible pairing of them, and that's already taken 25 issues to do it.
So the last thing I was going to ask you, and I feel like we've slightly touched on it already, was kind of your mission statement with One World Under Doom. What you want readers to take away from this book, both about, Doctor Doom as a character, about the Fantastic Four, about you as a writer, any of those stuff. We've kind of touched on it a little bit, but kind of once this series wraps up and people have got a chance to read all of it, What do you hope that the kind of memories and the takeaway is from One World Under Doom?
Yeah, that's a very hard question to answer without spoiling what happens at the end. What happens throughout the story, really.
If you want, I can just you can talk and I can just bleep for the next minute straight. That would be a really fun way to end this.
And then I just ruin your experience of the book.
Oh yeah, I'm screwed, but
yeah.
everyone else will find it really fun.
I do hope, I want it to be the biggest possible story I can tell with Doom. I want it to be the best possible story I can tell with Doom. I want it to be a story that matters for not just Doctor Doom, but the Marvel Universe, the people whose lives he impacts by making the choices that he does. It's, in many ways, it is a story about who this person is and what he wants writ large through this story of like the world, the Earth itself, and the people trying to shape it in different ways. It's a Doom story. Doom stories are big, they're bombastic, they're memorable, they have great speeches in them from Doom. They have great feats of plotting and machination. It's really, really fun and exciting. I hope they take away from the fact that they close the book and say, well, that was a fun and exciting story and I'd like to read it again.
I can co-sign that. Let's go with that. But yes, One World Under Doom out February 12th.
February 12th,
I
Wednesday,
believe.
February 12th.
So do mark your calendars and do check that out. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. Before we head out, would you like to let people know where they can find you, where they can keep up to date with everything you're working on? The floor is yours.
Yeah, I have a personal website, ryannorth.ca, that has links to almost everything I've written, from comics back down the way to my master's thesis. And the only place I really post anything casually or socially is on Blue Sky, where it's ryannorth.ca there. And it's just, jokes and hangouts and chuckle prompts. We have a good time.
Yeah, and then obviously fantastic for Dinosaur
Fantastic
Comics.
For Dinosaur Comics at quant.com or dinosaurcomics.com or humor.ca or poo.ca. Lots of addresses. Fantastic Four, One World Under Doom, lots of comics. And if you like nonfiction, How to Take Over the World is a nonfiction book about pulling off supervillain schemes in the real world. And, who can say? Maybe it's a sneak peek of what Doom's going to be up to, or maybe not.
A great, even if it's not, it is a great double feature to read back to back.
Thank you. I hope so.
But yes, I will leave links to everything in the description. So please do follow Ryan. Please do check out all of his amazing work. And please do check out One World Under Doom, February 12th. I'm really emphasizing the 12th part, so you don't forget. But yes, let me know your thoughts on this conversation in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, take care.